50, 90 finished very long ago. I'm sure like me your level of anticipation grows. I need to write more songs to improve my portfolio. I never know when I might meet an impresario. Let's have a solo. Vex me so. I need the answers so that I can get on with the show. And so I hope you'll tell me, 'cause I really need to know. The calendar remains unchecked. Is it FAWM yet? How are we all doing? It is Sunday, the 24th of January. There are just 8 days left until February. Album writing month starts again, and I cocked it up, and Array of Emotions has said, nice start as affiliate there. Yes, indeed. Look, see, hang on. Let's get rid of the caption. You've done the countdown. Week and 1 day. I made affiliate. Thank you all for getting me to a big milestone. And thank you to Ryako Music, who is my first ever subscriber. Much respect. So thank you very much. And Rabban Zif, thank you for pushing me over the line as well. Thank you very much all. I join you from a rather surprisingly snowy village at the moment. And in fact, I just looked while the opening credits were playing. I went to the front and had a look outside, and it is snowing. And not only is it snowing now, I've got a yellow warning for snow for the next, 11 hours? So, it could be very interesting tomorrow. I don't think I'll be going anywhere. I was going to go and do my shopping, but I think I'll be rather sensibly staying at home, Ryako Music says. Moved around the desk and cleaned up today and doing fine. You're very welcome, mate. Thank you, one and all. It was a bit of surprise. Thank you to Ginger Bitters, who some of you might know as Infinity Circuit, and Mr. Duncan, both from the William Gibson board. Surprise, who pushed me over the finishing line. Rabban Zif says, aha, snowing here too in Dusseldorf. Yeah, in Germany, they do proper snow. And you know how to drive about in it, which is more than can be said for the British. It takes less than half an inch of snow for the roads to become completely gridlocked, as one of my neighbours reported they were on Friday morning with less than half an inch of snow, couple of millimetres, he reckoned, and Bristol just chaos. Anyway, enough of the weather. I'm British, of course I'm talking about the weather. On tonight's show, I'm going to be talking through the basics of answering the question which somebody asked on the FAWM forums last week, which was, why does my music not sound as punchy and loud as everybody else's? And I can show you why that is. Not only can I show you why that is, I can show you how to do something about it for nothing. If you've got a DAW, if you've got an internet connection, I can point you in the direction of some tools that will not only improve your mixes, but they will also bring them up to spec in terms of loudness, which is a thing with all the different streaming platforms, whether it be YouTube, whether it be iTunes, whether it be Amazon Music, or whether it be burning a CD. Of course, they all have different standards, but if you know what the standards are and you know what your target is, then you can do something about it. So that's going to be what we're going to be talking about on the show. I also have, as I say, some tools that will help you get the results you're looking for and get them for nothing. So, a week till form. Have you signed up? Have you updated your form profile? Let's talk about that first, because I have been working my way through form profiles in an attempt to get rid of profiles that are there purely to optimize people's search engines. And that doesn't work anymore. It worked about 10, 15 years ago, but apparently in India, creating fake websites with backlinks to the address of the website that has paid them money to make them famous on Google is still doing it. Don't do it, folks. It doesn't work, and you're a pain in the butt to websites like February Album Writing Month and 5090, who have to go through all the new profiles that get created and block them and suspend them. And Tim Fatchen, hello Tim if you're watching, managed to break the record yesterday from spam profile being created to being suspended in less than 120 seconds. That's dedication. That shows you that we're kind of on the ball now, that we're trying to make the February Album Writing Month site nicer for you people. Rev Emotion says, oh my God, you should have seen the spam on the Metropolis Watch party event page on Facebook. It's insane. Oh dear. And that's another point, because I didn't watch on Saturday night. I was busy taking part watching a workshop on sync licensing. So I'll be talking about that in a little while. Wobby says, yes, I got caught by that spam as well. Hello, Wobby. Hello, everybody tuning in. Profiles on Form. When you sign up for Form, write yourself a profile. Some of the profiles on Form saying, I'm really looking forwards to taking part in Form 2011. Yeah, might want to update that a bit. And with looking at thousands and thousands of Form profiles and current count, there are now 2,870 suspended accounts. 2,870 accounts have been disabled for being naughty or for contravening the form terms and conditions and guidelines, or just basically being a spammer. And that's out of about 22,400 and something accounts. So that's over 12% and getting perilously close to 13% of all accounts. Yikes. But yeah, if you're writing a bio, there are some forms of writing a bio that after you've read half a dozen, they really do start getting on your nerves. And come on, guys, we're not a record company. It's not a press release. Don't write your bio in the third person, please. Please, just for me, just make it about you. Talk to us as if we're in the room with you. Talk to us as if, you know, you're just explaining what it is you want to get out of Form this year. Not the, you know, Chris Harris was born in Lytham St Anne's in 1960 where he was raised by wolves. Doesn't really work on Form. We just want to know what sort of things you're looking for in feedback, what sort of music you like doing, and then we can point you at other formers who do the same sort of music, so you can all get together and make the same sort of music and feedback on each other's work and elevate your creative standards, rather than, you know, getting yourself published or the blurb on the back of your album. It's kind of not the thing here. Array of Emotion says, you were raised by wolves. It's a secret. It's part of my superhero background. So yeah, don't write it in the third person, but write it. And if you wrote one last year, bring it up to date. It's 2021 now. There's all sorts of things going on that weren't going on last year, like the pandemic. Yeah. So if you're in lockdown, you're going to have plenty of time to work on form. You're going to have plenty of time to work on your profile over the next week. So get the keyboards rattling away. Type till your fingers bleed. Bring that profile up to date. And write a profile if you haven't got one. The number of accounts that I've been through over the last week that just say, no bio for this former, is rather depressing. So please write a bio. Not a biro, a bio. Arrive Emotion says, nah, nothing really happened in 2020. Bit of a slow year, really. Indeed. So let's make 2021 a little bit of a faster year, shall we? First thing, sync licensing. Had a sit-in a meeting, boot camp, seminar, webinar, whatever you want to call it, which was run by a bunch of guys in the States. And it was free. And what I'm about to say has to be said with the proviso that, yes, it was a free event, so I wasn't expecting it to be, particularly hard sell, and I wasn't expecting it to be very slick and all bells and whistles. But I think it's safe to say that the web platform that they were using was not up to the task, because the most heard phrase of the whole event, and it went on for 7 hours-ish, was, oh, hang on, I'll restart the room because people have lost me. And the stream would go off and it would come back and they would have been talking for a good couple of minutes. And what were they talking about? It sounded interesting. In fact, unfortunately, the two main bits where the stream crashed, when they came back, they'd obviously been talking about really, really, really useful information, which was the sort of information that I kind of signed up to sit and watch the stream for. But they spread their net too wide. So we got an hour about setting up your studio, and we got an hour about what makes a good songwriter. Those are great topics, but they're not really conducive to me watching as learning about how do you get into sync licensing? What are the things you have to do? What are the pitfalls? How do you do it? What libraries do you use? What are the things that you mustn't do? And eventually, about 6 hours in, we got to that information. So it wasn't a complete waste of time. And there was some good stuff. And I heard about this from Bobby Osinski, who is brilliant. And if you don't know Bobby Osinski, go over to bobbyosinski.com. That's OWSINSKI. He's an award-winning producer. He knows his stuff. He plays music as well. And he gave us some really, really helpful information. And the nerds on the stream kind of got, well, what plugins do you use? And actually it was like, oh, I've got that one. Oh, I've got that one too, which was nice to hear. I mean, some of them are quite expensive, and I mean, you can spend thousands on plugins. And of course, me being me, I wrote reams of notes, so I can tell you about some of the bits of kit for the nerds out there. So Townsend Labs. Apparently, I did not know this was a thing. One of the guys who was very helpful was a guitarist, producer, songwriter called Mike. And he extolled the virtues of the Kemper amp. And in fact, he said it was so good that he's got 3 of them. Now, I know our great friend Lord Sapient has a Kemper. It's a modelling amp. So basically, the amp listens to signal chains of other amps and has a response that is exactly duplicating that Marshall head in the background through a 4x12 cab or a Vox AC30 or anything else. So you literally dial in what amp you want to use and the Kemper goes, yeah, okay, I can do that. I wasn't aware that you can do that with microphones, but apparently you can. And the guy last night had one. It was a Townsend Labs Sphere. Other modelling microphones are available. But he was basically saying, oh yeah, I'd dial in Neo 86 and it sounds like this. And it was like, huh? So technology, kids, I surround myself with it, and I'm completely out of touch with some of the stuff that was going on last night. But there were a few things that I'll share you a few sentences that I wrote down. And it was, I mean, it's like, yes, the sky is blue. You have to treat it as a business. If you treat sync licensing as a hobby, you will lose money doing it. You have to run it sensibly and as a business. Sign up with sync libraries, because the checks and balances and filters in between you and the people who make the decisions to put pieces of music in TV shows are many and hard and varied. And sync libraries and their representatives get to the point where they're trusted by the people who make the decisions. So if you place your music with a sync library, then you sidestep a lot of the filters. And I mean, come on, the event was run by folk who run a sync library, so kind of a no-brainer there. But even so, it's true. Somebody who was asked, and Tamara did some of the music for Borderlands 3, so I was immediately immensely impressed by that. And she was asked, when you're writing stuff, and you know, what are the sweet spots, what are the things that people really like in arrangements for sync licensing? And she said, strings and horns. If you can do strings and horns convincingly, then you're good. Yeah, it was quite an intense, full-on night, and I spent a lot of time scribbling down notes and refreshing and reconnecting my connection to the web platform they were using. And Firefox, I opened the link in Firefox, and Firefox just went. So I had to fire up Google Chrome and use that instead, which didn't really impress me. Yeah, the chat window, like you get on a Zoom conference, chat window at the side, fell over. Apart from for one guy. So the chat window just consisted of one guy who was called Craig, who was not particularly impressed, I have to say. In fact, I think the last text that he put in the chat just said, SMH. Technology, eh? That's the way it goes. Right. We're going to talk about a specific type of technology today. So I am just firing up my latest version of a presentation that I've done before. But I've been back to it and I've extensively revamped it, and spent yesterday afternoon swearing at LibreOffice because it wasn't doing what it did during the last version. But I've wrangled it, I've wrestled it to the ground, I've taught it to sit up and beg. It's even running full screen on the right monitor, so that's a first. So let's go over to my screen share. So tonight, ladies and gentlemen, once again, it's the head-first only guide to compressors. So buckle in, get yourself a notepad and a pen if you want to take notes. But if you don't want to take notes, whole thing's going to be on YouTube by tomorrow lunchtime, tomorrow tea time, depending on what time I drag myself out of bed. And let's get on with it, shall we? So the HFO guide to compressors. I'm going to go away because I'm just going to get in the way and you want to see this. So bye-bye me. What are we talking about with a compressor? So here's a graph. Two axes. The x-axis on the bottom is how loud your performance is. Silent on the origin, very loud on the right. Okay, so this axis where my mouse cursor is moving along is increasing loudness of what you are doing musically. The y-axis is how loud that ends up being when it's recorded on your recorder or your DAW or your tape machine or your multi-tracker or your phone, whatever it is you're using to record. The vertical axis is how loud it is when it's recorded. So if you're very loud, then your recording will be very loud. So the green line is basically the response of your recording machine to what you're doing. So the green line, so loud, louder, very loud, extremely loud, and oh dear, that's terribly loud. And what happens when we get terribly loud? You get distortion, you get clicking. The French Dogie says frequency X equals AX. Now there is a man who's done calculus. Well done, sir. So yes, when things get beyond a certain volume level, at that point there, then your poor recorder can't cope anymore, or your microphone can't cope anymore, and it starts distorting. And as Array of Emotion says, that red zone is when Rick Rubin wakes up. Indeed he does. And if you're Motorhead, your entire recording tends to sit in the red zone because everything's louder than everything else. But that's the way of metal. Unfortunately, for things like folk music or Joan Baez albums, that's kind of not what you want. So what can you do about it? There are pieces of equipment, what we are talking about, called compressors. And over a certain threshold, and we'll come back to that term threshold in a bit, they kick in and they squash the sound that you're making. So you're still being very loud, but the amount of extra volume that gets laid down to tape or put onto your DAW no longer increases as quickly with your increasing volume. So you squish it. And the proportion of how squished it is to the full thing. So if there's no squishing at all, it's 1:1. And that's the ratio of the compressor. So that looks to me like about what, it's probably 2 or 3 to 1 in terms of how much it's squishing it. So for every twice as loud that you get, the signal gets 1 loud. So that's a 2-to-1 ratio. A compressor squashes the sound so that it keeps your signal out of the distortion zone. Simples. No distortion. Hooray! That's what we're looking for. Okay. There is a drawback to that, which is you want to keep some dynamic range in your music. It's the difference between the quietest part of the track. So there's silence in the middle, so it's a mirror image up and down. So that's the difference between the absolute quietest part of the track, which is there, and the loudest part of the track, which is there. That's the dynamic range, and that's usually measured in decibels. So decibel is a measure of music loudness, and it's a logarithmic measure, which basically means it's easier to graph over very large ranges and understand the response, and it's usually in powers of 10. The French Dogie says Audacity dark theme looks nice. Yeah, Couldn't go back to the light theme now. This is Audacity, which I still use for editing music, and it's also really useful for creating really nice looking graphs of pieces of music. So there we go. Okay, dynamic range. You want dynamic range. You don't want your music squashed flat. So you want light and dark. You want loud and quiet, because if you don't have gaps and range, it doesn't half kill your ears, believe me. So compressors, they were invented back in the days of vinyl, of LPs. You remember those black round things that people used to put on turntables? Compressors were invented because the size of a groove on an LP limited the amount of dynamic range that you could get on an album. It was usually around 70 decibels. What happened if you tried putting more than that? Quite simple. The stylus would jump out of the groove because the record was too loud. Now, compare that 70 decibels with the dynamic range of a CD, which is between 96 and more than 120 decibels. And believe me, the first time I heard a CD after only ever listening to vinyl was a Peter Gabriel album, and it was the track The Rhythm of the Heat on Peter Gabriel 4. And when I heard what that sounded like on a CD compared with my vinyl version, I just said one word, and the word was, oh. And I've never really recovered. So, compressors, they reduce the difference between the loudest and the quietest part of the audio. They squash it. So they usually squash the loudest part down. Now that makes them quieter. So what compressors also do is they kind of raise the rest of the sound up, so that when you listen to the track when the compressor's kicked in, you really don't want to notice that the compressor's there at all. An expander increases the difference between the loudest and the quietest parts of the audio, so it does exactly the reverse. So that little graph is what's known as a transfer function, and a lot of compressors actually have that graph as their display on the plugin in your DAW. So this is Ableton's compressor plugin, and it's at a preset called Mix Gel, and it has that graph on it and the little line, so you can see there's not much squishing going on. So if you continue the dotted line or the blue line up, then it will go up to that corner, and because it's not squished very much down, you can see the ratio there. The ratio is 1.2 to 1. So for every 1.2 you get louder, the compressor only gets louder by 1. That's all that means. That's all the ratio is. Going back to our graph, there's your input level, there's your output level. Simple, right? So the dot basically there will move up and down on the Ableton compressor because it's showing you the current state of the signal that's coming in and where it ends up being recorded. So that dot will only ever travel along the blue line because it's following the rules, the ratio that the compressor has been told to operate at. There's your threshold. Threshold to the left, nothing happens. Yeah, you adjust it using that little dial there. There are two other lines which make the kink in the line, the response of the compressor, less noticeable. And that region where the compressor starts to kick in, so in this example, the compressor's not working at all there, starts to kick in at this point here, goes up. By the time you get to this point here, the compressor is fully functional, fully working, and it's doing its maximum of squishing. You can narrow or widen that knee so it's either really savage or very, very mild, and a 12 decibel range for a knee is quite mild. So it takes 12 decibels of an increase in loudness from starting to work to completely kicking in. So that's a hard knee, where it just has a point where the compressor starts working, and that's your soft knee, which is what we just showed on the last page. So yeah, you kind of don't want massive sudden changes in the amount of compression applied to your signal, because it's really, really ugly sounding when it happens, because you start paying attention to the compressor kicking in, not to the music. And a few years ago, there was a digital radio station in the UK called Planet Rock, and they had their output signals set to go through a compressor with a hard knee on it. And the ratio they were using and the hard knee was so violent that I literally gave up listening to the station, because it was messing up the sound that badly. Areva Motion says, I guess in graphics this would be called smoothing. Yeah, or even anti-aliasing, because what you're doing is disguising the edge of where things are happening. So yeah, good point. How much compression? So this is where we're talking about ratios again. So here's my ratio of 1.20 to 1. So that's the uncompressed signal there, and the blue line is the ratio here, which is 1.20 to 1. So that yellow line there is probably going to be about 3 to 1 if you look at the squares, something around there. And you can adjust it. You can go from 1 to 1, in which case the compressor won't do anything at all, to infinity to 1. And we'll come on to what happens when you set a compressor to infinity to 1, and people do, in a minute. So as I said, a compressor with a ratio of 1 to 1 won't do anything. The higher the ratio, the more noticeable effect, because you're basically squishing it more. Use your ears. Learn what a compressor sounds like. So put a compressor on a track, dial it up, kick it in, and then switch between listening to the compressor with the compressor on and listening to the compressor with the compressor bypassed. And you'll hear it's got more punch. Now, Mel did a lot of mastering on her Metropolis score for the premieres that she did on Tuesday and on Saturday night last week. And it was very obvious just how much more punch there was in the version of the score that she streamed with us on the Tuesday and Saturday night. It really did work. It was great. The snares were tighter, the kick drums were more powerful. It just generally sounded better. The thing, if you drop a compressor on a set of drums, it will tend to bring up the quieter signals in the background of the noise. So on drums, you'll hear more room noise. And if you drop a very high ratio compressor on vocals, you'll get horrible breath and mouth noise. So sometimes you want to be a bit careful with the compression ratios that you use. And to that end, what people quite often do is, rather than have one really, really violent compressor, they'll have two compressors, one chained after the next. So the second compressor acts on the output from the first, and it's perfectly okay to do that. And you'll actually get better results that way than you would if you just used a single compressor. So remember what I said about having a ratio of infinity to 1. There are such things. They're called limiters. And a limiter basically says at the point where the threshold is that, right, that's it. That's as loud as you're getting. Anything else that you make in terms of an increase in volume, I'm just going to output it at exactly the same volume level as the threshold is there. So literally the output is a horizontal line. So your ratio there is infinity to 1, because it doesn't matter how far along that line you go. You can go to infinity and the output signal won't get any louder. So that's what a limiter is. So we've covered compressors, we've covered expanders, we've covered limiters. Cool, right? You don't necessarily want your compressor to start working instantly, apart from the fact that you can't actually physically make something work instantly without some clever jiggery pokery, and I'll come to the jiggery pokery in a minute because that's what this is. You might want the compressor to only start working after the absolute loudest part of the signal has gone through the system. And equally, you don't necessarily want it to switch off immediately when the signal goes below the threshold, because it will be very noticeable. So here, the compressor's set to come on 12.5 milliseconds after the signal goes past the threshold, and it won't release until 1.02 seconds after the signal has dropped to the left-hand side of the threshold again. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, here's a waveform that I recorded in Audacity this afternoon, and that's me coughing. Okay, so there's two very, very, very fast peaks, and those are called transients. We'll come on to transients in a minute. And then the sound dies away as the cough finishes. So the output level of a compressor, if I superimpose that over the top, there you go. So when it's hearing no sound, it's outputting at full volume, but that 12.5 milliseconds after the start of the cough kicks in, the compressor reduces the volume level, and then the release is slow, and we said it was 1.2 seconds, so it takes 1.2 seconds after the volume gets below the threshold again for the compressor to release the signal and turn the volume back up to how it was before it kicked in. So that's your attack and your release on a compressor. And if you're playing drums, you kind of need that first hit to get through the compressor. That's why you don't want a compressor to kick in instantly, because otherwise your drums would sound horrible. There's your attack phase and there's your release phase. There you go. Just to make it even more obvious that that's what's going on. Okay, I said transients. Short bursts of sound that occur during a track. A transient normally is the first bit of a noise, whether it's a cough or a snare hit or a kick drum or a cymbal smash or even the beater hitting a triangle. Those all generate transients, very, very sharp, very, very loud bursts of noise, and then the rest of the noise dies away. They're very important to the perceived quality and character of the sound, as it says there, because that's what makes a kick drum kick. That's what gives a snare punch. And when I said punch there are plosives in what I'm saying, which is the explosion of air when I say a P or a B, and that explosion of air can hit a microphone, and a compressor can be used to control those plosives. But you don't want a compressor to ruin your transits. So what the compressor listens to, there are different ways of monitoring the sound. You can go for the peak, which is the absolute highest volume level of the sound, or it can average it out and do it more over time using the root mean squared of the sound signal. So it's averaging it over time, mean, and it's the square root of the square. So yeah, it's just fairly simple maths, but what it lets you do is give you a response of a compressor that more closely mimics the way that we hear sound, rather than how an electronic circuit hears a sound, which would just be, oh, peak, I need to work. With RMS, it sort of reacts over time, and it's a little bit mellower and a little bit more to our liking. It will give you better results, I think. But sometimes you need to use peaks. The French Doggy says, talking about transients, will you talk about the transient shaper in a future show? Also, can you put together compressors and transient shapers? Absolutely you can, and I do. And yes, I will talk about those in a further show. Ryako Music says, lol, I didn't know what that meant. Okay, so a compressor basically can squish that initial burst of the music. If I go back, let's go back to me cough. All right, so there's two transients there. There's that little burst there, and there's that little burst there. Okay, and in most cases, well, for a cough or a plosive, your compressor needs to squash those. Whoops. So you want the compressor to squash. You'd move that line further to the left so that it kicks in to start on the transient and gets rid of them. Okay, so that's what a compressor will do. However, there are other plugins, and on Ableton there's one called Drum Bus. And what Drum Bus does is exactly the reverse of that. It listens for transients and it goes, oh, that's a nice one. I'm really going to exaggerate that. And the Drum Bus plugin on Ableton Live 10 really changed my drum sound. It is an extraordinary device. There is a preset on it which is just called Bonzo on the Drums. And it does what it says on the tin. When we have finished the presentation, I'll show you the transient shaper in action and you can hear it. And you'll know what I mean when I talk about Bonzo on the drums. Bonzo being Led Zeppelin's John Bonham, and the drum sound in question being the drum sound that was obtained by sticking the drum kit at the bottom of a staircase in a Victorian mansion called Headley Grange, and the engineer had left an echo on, and Bonham was sitting in the bottom of the staircase on his drums thrashing around, and the engineer heard the sound coming through into the control room of the recording studio that they'd set up in the manor, and just said, don't touch anything. And the drum sound on that track is the drum sound you can hear when you listen to When the Levee Breaks, which is one of the all-time top 3 drum sounds in rock ever, and probably always will be. Okay, back to the presentations. You don't want your compressor ruining your transients. So what does the compressor listen to? It listens to the root mean squared, or the peak of the signal that's coming in. Reaction time, I said it takes time for electrons and audio to travel down your wires. So with DAW based compressors, you can cheat. You can actually make the compressor look ahead at the signal that has already been recorded, because remember, this is sort of DAWs, and it can be ready to kick in at the point where the transient or the loud signal arrives. Weird, eh? Electronics or magic? Who can say? Right, sidechaining I'm not really going to deal with because I don't really do dubstep. But what sidechaining means is that you, rather than the compressor kicking in through the signal for that track, say it's your drums, you might actually sidechain it from another audio input like the bass, or you might sidechain the bass with an input from the kick drum. And what it means is it will squish the bass to let the noise from the kick drum come through, so that they're not fighting each other for sound energy, because you've only got a limited amount of sound energy in your mix. Hello, Dazed and Confused. Hi, Cody. Great show so far. I've been listening, but finally finished dinner and a lot of stuff that's new to me. I know what these things do in an analog world by ear, but digital visual manipulation is new to me. Haha, it's magic. There you go. So hello, and thanks for joining us, mate. So yeah, you can make your bass guitar get out of the way for the kick drum. But remember I was talking about attack and release? If you then make the release slow, and maybe you're putting the kick drum in an input to control the volume of, say, a synth pad, then when the kick drum kicks, the synth pad, if you've got a big ratio, when the kick drum kicks, the synth pad will go away. And then if you've got a slow release, it will gradually come back. And so that sidechaining effect, using the kick to trigger a slow-ish compressor on a different audio track, is how you get that whoop, whoop, whoop noise in dubstep. It's sidechaining, and that wub 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 is known in the trade as pumping. And it used to be something that people hated, didn't like it. Now basically there are some genres where if you're not using sidechaining to get that wub 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 noise, you're not doing it right. How weird is that? That something that used to be a bug is now a feature. Crazy. Volume levels. Okay, so when you impose compression, your blue line to the right of the threshold, because that's the output level when the compressor's working, is lower than it would be if the compressor was just 1-to-1. So you're reducing the volume level of the output signal when the compressor kicks in. Okay? And that's what that diagram is showing there. Now, some compressors will automatically turn the volume up of the processed signal so that there is no difference in volume when you click on the little button here to bypass the effect. So when it's not working and when it's working, the volume level shouldn't change. And most compressors in DAWs can even do that automatically. You can, and really you shouldn't, use the makeup for gain staging. In other words, for deliberately using the volume control in makeup to make your signal louder. Don't do that, kids. It makes stuff horrendously difficult to control in a mix, and it really, really will not help your final mix. So an expander, compressor to expander, basically in Ableton, you just click the expander button. Beware of presets. Listen to what the compressor is doing. Use your ears. Don't just pick a preset because the preset says this is what mastering should sound like, because your music might be different. So use your ears and adjust accordingly. unless you're deliberately creating pumping, the compressor's use shouldn't be noticeable. And a lot of tracks just sound so crushed. It's like, oh, that's horrible. Ugly, ugly, ugly stuff. What do I mean? Okay, this is an MP3 file. I did this morning. This is Muse's opening track, Take a Bow, from their album Black Holes and Revelations. So it starts off pretty... I mean, clearly the mix engineer did this in sections, right? Look, there are the sections. There's where the mix engineer changed the compression ratio. So he starts off and it's low volume and it's still pretty squished. There's not much of a dynamic range in there. The difference between 0 and max is not very much. And by the end of it, it's just solid orange. And in the height of the loudness wars, that was the way to master your music. It ruins it. If you listen to it, it's just viciously, viciously loud. And if your whole album is mastered like that, and stand up the guys from Rush, because their album Vapor Trails was originally mastered like that, it pretty much renders your product unlistenable. And Rush actually paid to have their Vapor Trails album remixed and re-engineered to stop that, to give their music more dynamic range, because that's horrendous. But it happened. It was a thing. It was known as the Loudness War. Companies wanted their bands to sound louder than everyone else when they were played on the radio, because the person who shouts most loudly gets the attention. Sadly, that was the philosophy of the music business in the 90s and the early part of the 21st century. So, of course, when one band does that, everybody else has to do it too. And record companies clued into this and realised that our CDs all sound quiet now, don't we? We'd better remaster them. So all those remastered CDs that went on sale of classic albums from the 70s and 80s, you bought them in the 90s, somebody had basically slapped a massive amount of compression on it. And in some cases, the sound engineers had not a clue what they were doing. There is a Steely Dan album where the mastering engineer who did the remaster basically ignored the marimbas at the beginning of, I think it's Ricky, Don't Lose That Number. So if you bought the remastered version of the album, tough, you didn't actually get the first 15 seconds of the song. And it would have been compressed to within an inch of its life. So when you see old versions of CDs, those are kind of the ones you want to get, kids. But all things come to an end. Eventually, Apple said, look, this is just getting bloody silly because it's distorting everything. And they started imposing their own processing on tracks that were being submitted to iTunes to meet loudness standards, and we'll come on to that now. Loudness is measured in loudness units full scale, LUFS, and when you're using a limiter with a compressor called a maximizer, then you set it so that the limiter doesn't allow a signal above a certain maximum volume, but it also sets target loudness. So for a television recording, you want to set a target loudness of minus 24 units, loudness units full scale. iTunes and most video games, they're looking for a target loudness of minus 16 loudness units full scale. YouTube allows videos that are as loud as -13 loudness units full scale. Spotify go one better and they allow loudness units full scale -12. And if you're old school like me and you're mastering for CD, then you kind of want to master for about -9 loudness units full scale. Because I mainly master for Bandcamp and streaming, these days I have my loudness tools, and I'll show you how I set my loudness tools up. I have mine set at -14 loudness units full scale. If I'm burning a CD, I might remaster it to -9 loudness units full scale. I might not bother. But so different industries have different target loudnesses. Thing is, if you say, well, I still want my EDM stuff to be really, really kicking, and I master my stuff to -8 loudness units full scale, fine, do it. But when it ends up on iTunes and Spotify, they will crush it so that it matches their settings, not your settings. So, loudness tracking tools. What I was saying about ways in which you can make your own recordings sound loud enough and set them to those target levels. So let's just click on this one. There's a free one. It's the best free loudness meter on the market, it says. It's the Julian loudness meter. Julian being the developer's name. So it's not Yulene, it's Julian. And you can download a free version, or you can buy the pro version, and it will tell you what your loudness units full scale reading is for the piece of music that you've fed into it. So you will normally drop your loudness meter on the mix bus. So the mix bus being the master track of your album. Motion says, I think on Twitch regular streams now are at -13 and ads are at +20. Yes, that's probably about right, sadly. Dazed and Confused says, contracts, most bands didn't even have say on getting the stuff they'd sweated over being remastered. It's very true. But, you know, and that's contracts and what you sign your life away for. So of those, there's free, there's 35 quid if you go to Waves, who at the moment are doing one of their perpetual sales where you get 40% off a bunch of plugins, and if you spend over $50 you get another free plugin, and if you spend over $90 you get another free plugin. So you can start amassing a nice collection of very, very good plugins from Waves, and they do a loudness meter, and it's called WM loudness meter. What do I use? I use Isotope's Insight 2, and I'm going to show you this after I finish the presentation. I've nearly finished now, so we've nearly come to the end. Ostensibly it goes for 199 quid. There's a free 10-day trial, but keep an eye out for their bundle deals, because they are almost always offering a bundle deal that will let you pick it up for considerably less than $200. Right, so we've got to the point now where I've covered all that, and we've got to the point where I can answer the question that somebody asked on the forums on FAWM last week, which was, why doesn't my stuff sound as good as anybody else's? And the simple reason is they've probably slapped a decent chunk of compression on the master bus, on the mix bus, on the final left and right stereo bus that's your main meters on your mixer, on your DAW. And if you're going to put mix bus compression on your song, put the compressor on to start with. And I use the Waves L1 Ultra Maximizer, talked about that last week, which is a compressor limiter, and I set it so that its true peak is -0.3 dB, and I usually have it set with the maximizer at around -5 dB, because I'm looking for that loudness units, full scale reading of -14. But putting a compressor on your mix bus will change the way your instruments come through in the mix. They will sound differently. That's why you want to put the compressor on the mix bus before you start, so that you're hearing what will come through in the final mix as you're playing it. Because if you leave it until the end, when you've got all your plugins and volume levels and everything set up on the individual tracks, and then you move to the master bus, the mix bus, dropping a compressor on is completely going to change your final mix. Everything will sound different because all the quiet stuff will have been made louder, all the really loud stuff will be crushed a bit, and you'll probably have to start your mix again. So work smart, put a compressor on the mix bus before you start. Don't go nuts with it. Set the ratio low, 2:1 at the most, I would say, on a mix bus. Probably less than that. What you're looking to do is glue everything together. And some DAWs, including Gableton, actually have a specific category of compressor that is designed to glue your mix together. And strangely enough, it's called a glue compressor. Who'd have thought, eh? So set a slow attack so that it lets the transients through, but set it with a fast release so it's ready to kick in again the next time the signal gets really loud. And adjust the threshold so that you're only seeing a reduction of about 1 or 2 dB. You don't want the view meter, if your compressor has a view meter, I'll show you one that does. You don't want it leaping from one side to the other. You want the needle to be barely moving. You don't want to notice that the compressor's doing its thing. You just want to listen to a track and go, "Oh, that's got punch." And adjust the makeup gain so there's no volume difference when the effect is bypassed. So if you click it on and bypass, you shouldn't hear any difference in the mix. And that's kind of it. So at this point, what have you learned? If you want to watch this again, I'll be putting it up on my YouTube channel, which is Head First Only. And strangely enough, I've got 50 subscribers on my YouTube channel now as well. So hooray, thank you for following me on YouTube as well. What can you use? Well, if you're still a bit tentative about what's involved in using compressors on a mix bus, then I'll show you one that I prepared earlier, and we'll do that now. So for the moment, that's me done with my presentation. Thank you for watching. I hope that was useful. If you've got any questions, then please chuck them in the chat and I will do my best to answer them. So, loudness, mastering, loudness units, compressors, exciters, limiters, gates, the works. I'm still working on the Spontaneous Grand Pianos album. I'm still deep diving into the selection of virtual pianos that I have amassed over the last few years with buying various DAWs and instrument collections and free plugins and free sampled virtual instruments. This time round, it's back to the Maverick. So it's one of Native Instruments' sampled pianos. And it's rather splendid. I do like it. It's a bit funky. It's a bit Art Deco. It's a bit 1920s. And if I play you it, and we're actually at the beginning of the track, so before the fade. In fact, let's go to about there. It's got that lovely sort of fairly dark brownish sort of sound. I really, really like the Maverick. And you can do loads of tweaking with it. You can, if I change the views, so we've got the plug-in, you can do all sorts of things with the mic placing. So you can move the virtual mics further back so that you get more room noise. You can change the amount by which strings adjacent to the note that is sounding resonate in sympathy. You can change the overtones that happen with the interaction of loads of physics. It's physics, Jim. You can change the laws of physics, but the thing is you can, because you just fiddle the dial in the Maverick. So Scotty didn't know what he was talking about. It's true. And why don't I just play you this track? So this is, again, it's all about deep time. It's about the concept that if you waited around long enough after the end of the heat death of the universe, the probability of virtual particles popping in and out of existence, as they do all the time, and they could even be used as a source of power, because Google Casimir effect. Eventually, you might suddenly, somewhere in the deep space of the empty, dark universe, see a spontaneous grand piano pop into existence. I just love that image. So the album's called Spontaneous Grand Pianos. Every track has a piano of some sort, not necessarily all grand pianos, although the Maverick is a sort of teeny tiny grand. It's still way too large for me to fit in my living room, but I can dream. I've got it on my keyboard anyway. And this track is called the Photon Age, which is kind of the heat death part of the universe, when all atoms have disintegrated and decayed, all the black holes have evaporated, and all that's left in the entire universe will be photons of infrared radiation. And infrared radiation is heat, and that's why it's called the heat death of the universe. It's physics, Jim, once again. And this track is called the Photon Age. So here we go. So that is a draft of the Photon Age. So what you're looking at is Isotope's Insight 2 loudness tracking tool on the left, which is tracking the integrated loudness over the entire track, because it's not about instance, it's about the track as a whole. And different companies monitor loudness and average loudness out in different ways. But Insight kind of works for me, so what I'm using. So I'm 0.3 dB hot. So I need to look at that. Insight also gives me a loudness history of the entire track. So there are some bits, there are noticeable dips in the volume. And you kind of want the volume to be consistent, unless it's for musical effect. You kind of want it to not suddenly go really, really quiet and then get really loud again, because that's going to piss off listeners. So, and the momentary loudness there, the highest value it got was minus 9.4 loudness units full scale. So my maximizer is in ozone. It's set to a true peak value of minus 0.3 dB. My true point, I didn't even come close to it. So my true peak was minus 0.6. So I'm cool with that. I probably need to nudge my threshold downwards a bit to make everything, upwards a bit to make everything upwards or downwards? Can't remember. But I need to adjust. Or I simply just click on this thing here that says learn threshold and just play it through. And ozone is clever enough that it will just go, yeah, okay, I see what you're getting at here. I'll set it here. And the next time you then play it with the maximizer set at that value, it will drop out at the end within 1 or 2 dB or points of a dB of your target loudness field. Thing at the bottom here, tonal balance control 2, is a target equalization curve. So it's telling me whether, so I've picked as a genre, God knows why, orchestral. So my bass frequencies need to be in this blue box. My low mid frequencies need to be in this blue box, my high mids in this blue box, and my high frequencies in this blue box. And that's the broad scale assessment of it. You can be really nerdy and you can go fine scale, and it's not listening to the track at the moment, which is why it's way off. But that lets you check to see if your EQ curve is matching the EQ curve that Ozone and Tonal Balance Control and the people at Isotope, who are very, very clever people, have averaged the equalization curves of many songs in a particular genre to say, well, an orchestral equalization curve is going to look like that. So if you're doing orchestral music and you get your wiggly white line there inside that blue curve, then you're pretty much good. What's really neat about tonal balance control is that you don't have to stick to a genre, because this is one of the things I want to talk about is reference tracks. And reference tracks basically means having a track that you really like the sound of on your system in here. Now, not going to play you a reference track, because reference tracks that I use are by multi-platinum selling bands, and they're multiple platinum selling bands for a reason. The production's good and everything else, but that's copyrighted material. So this is Twitch, only ever going to play my own material, but graphically I can show you what is involved, because if I go to this preset section on tonal balance control, there are a bunch of actual singles. So there's Beginner's Mind, Nobody Speak by DJ Shadow. That's the equalization curve that you want to aim for if you want your track to sound like Nobody Speak by DJ Shadow. Look how much bass there is. It's all about the bass. Compare and contrast that with J-Rock, which is almost exactly the same. Looper Fiasco's much more variability in the mids. See? And if you buy tonal balance control, you don't have to restrict yourself to presets that you can download from Isotope's site. If you've got a reference track, you can play it at tonal balance control and it will listen to your reference track and go, okay, yeah, that's this. So I did it on one track that I did for 5090. I just did it as a bit of a laugh. I can't even remember what the track was, but for a reference track I was using Owner of a Lonely Heart, which was a massive hit single for Yes back in the 80s, and it was mixed, mastered and produced by a certain Mr. Trevor Horn, who was and is a genius record producer, also a founder member of the Maverick Fairlight based musical group The Art of Noise. So yeah, you can throw your own songs or your own favorite songs into tonal balance control and it will listen to them and then it'll go, yeah, okay, I know what that sounds like. And then you throw your track into it and it will tell you where your track is different. And you can do that with an A-B mix. So if you've got a DAW and you've got an MP3 of a track that you really like, drop it as a track into your latest arrangement, an A-B between the two. So play your own mix through the speakers and then play that soloed track through the speakers and see where the differences are. You know, are the drums too loud? Are the drums not loud enough? Is there too much bass? Is there way too much treble on the hi-hats? All those things. Listen to what other producers, other mixers, other masterers have done. Use your ears. Use your system. Get to know what your system does to pieces of music that you really, really know like the back of your hand because you've listened to them on different systems over and over and over again. Every system you listen to a piece of music on will make it sound subtly different. It really will. So learning what the system that you're using for producing music does to pieces of music that you know well means that you can then fix or be wary of pitfalls of missing stuff that maybe your system doesn't pick up. And in this room, I've got my KRK near field monitors. I've also got a very, very venerable pair of old Technics 7-inch speakers from an old hi-fi system from donkey's years old, and a Denon hi-fi amp. So I can literally squirt stuff from Ableton directly into my old hi-fi here and out of a set of hi-fi speakers, which gives me a completely different feel for what things are going to sound like in the mix. And for a third option, I also have the first set of computer speakers that I ever acquired back in 1994. They're a set of Altec Lansings, little tiny desktop speakers, and under the desk there's about a foot cube subwoofer that they plug into. And that gives me a third set of speakers and a third way of playing music and listening to music and comparing what I'm doing with a reference track. And doing that will really, really help get your music to sound better. So this is kind of my process. So when I start off, like I was saying, if you're going to use compression, then you want to do it to start with. So on my mix bus down here at the bottom, let's get rid of me so you can see it, because I'm talking about something that's under my picture. Okay, there's my mix bus. So at the bottom, the track is the bottom track in your DAW normally. It's a left and right twin channel mix of everything else that is in your track and the A and B sends. So on my A send, I've got Valhalla's Supermassive Reverb, and on my B send, I've just got Ableton's delay. And on the master track, as I said, I'm using Waves L1 Plus Ultra Maximizer. There is a free version of the L1 Plus Ultra Maximizer that is made by somebody else. I mentioned it on last week's show, so go back to last week's show on YouTube, or it's still up on Twitch, or go to my blog, which is going to come up in the links at the end of the show. But basically, if you go to headfirstonly.com and look for the blog, or just Google Chris Harris blog Headfirst Only, you will find the blog. And the blog carries all the links from all the shows, and it will point you at the free version of this little chappy, the Waves L1 Plus Ultra Maximizer. See, once again, I've got the true peak set at minus 0.3 dB. Got the threshold on this, which is when it starts squishing stuff, up at about minus 6 dB. But I have that before I've started anything on the track at all. There is nothing in the track at all. That's just the template that I have built in Ableton that loads as my default set when I click new set, file new set, new live set in Ableton. And if you make your own template in Ableton, and so Ableton uses heads up, if you make a template like this that is exactly how you want everything to be when you first fire up Ableton, get the set up that way. Don't record anything into it, but just go to Options, Preferences, and then where it says File Folder, Save Current Set as Default, just click on Save. Overwrite the current set, the default set, yes please. So from now on, every time I open Ableton, it will open with a copy of this set already loaded. Saves loads and loads of time, especially for me. So this is my ambient set. it doesn't have a drum track, so I'm going to chuck a drum track as track 1. And so it's a MIDI track for drums. I have a plugin that does the drumming for me. It's made by the lovely people at TuneTrack, and it's called Superior Drummer 3. And Superior Drummer also loads and uses all the MIDI files and all the recordings of other drum kits from TuneTrack's slightly more reasonably priced drum machine programming MIDI virtual instrument, which is called Easy Drummer 2, which is really good. I started off with Easy Drummer, used it for years, but then when I really started getting obsessed about drums, I thought, you know what, I'm gonna use Superior Drummer 3. And one of the main reasons that I picked Superior Drummer 3 was because I spent many happy hours watching live streams of a certain Mr. Devin Townsend at work in his studio, and lo and behold, Dev uses Superior Drummer 3. Not only does Dev use Superior Drummer 3, the folks from TuneTrack put the drum kit that Dev uses into TuneTrack. So we now have a copy of Devin Townsend's drum kit on my desktop, in my DAW, ready to use. So next thing is to pick a set of grooves, and I'm just going to use the factory standards that come with Superior Drummer 3. I'm going to start in with a 4/4 beat counting. On the hi-hat, so we'll have that. Right, that counting is at, what's the tempo on that? I think it's 120 beats per minute. I kind of want 120 beats per minute because my ambient template is a bit on the slow side. It's 88 beats per minute, which is a bit too sluggish for drums. So I'm going to say, yes, I want the tempo and the time signature, which is 4/4. And let's just drag that window to the side. Yeah, it's 120 beats per minute. Sorted. So now let's find a nice straight 4/4 beat. Mid-tempo is kind of 120 BPM, isn't it? So there's one that's 124 bouncy eighth notes. So let's just pick a verse. So this is now going to play a 4/4 beat with every eighth note accentuated through Devin Townsend's drum kit straight into Ableton. And all I've got on Ableton is the L1 Plus Ultra Maximizer on the master bus that's basically making it a bit louder. And we'll put the drum loop in, and then I'm gonna just make it repeat. I'm going to make it repeat, and then I'm going to start adding stuff like I was saying. So first of all, so there's my loop brace at the top. So I can now make this repeat, and we'll close down Superior Drummer because I don't really need that at the moment. On the master bus, I'm going to turn off the Ultra Maximizer by clicking on this little yellow button. So now this is absolutely vanilla, straight out of Superior Drummer as it comes out of the box, playing the drums on the track. And this is what they sound like. So lots of rim shots. Maybe we'll try something different, shall we? Because that's a bit dull. Let's try, it's a bit noisy. We'll try something progressive. There we go. Let's try this one. That's more to my liking. And when you've been doing this as long as I have, you start amassing humongous amounts of drum midis, and they all come in useful. And weird time signatures, I has them. Okay, so there's me drums, vanilla, no processing. So now let's turn on the Ultra Maximizer and see if you notice what difference it makes. Turn it off. Suddenly all the punch goes away again. And listen to the boom on the kick drum as I put the Ultra Maximizer back in. You can hear it all more because the compressor, it's letting the punch through, which is the transient, but then it's making the quiet stuff, the bit where the bass drum actually rings, it's making it louder so you can hear it. So if I enable it, bypass, so the first thing that I noticed there, which I need to fix, is that the output sounds louder than the input. So there are ways of changing that, but we'll come on to those on another day because I think it's actually that one. Oh, that's left and right, so that's not it. There we go. So if I bypass it, it shouldn't change in volume. There we go. That's about right. So again, you don't really want the maximizer to be really noticeable. You just want it. You just want to hear the punch, and that punch is definitely there. Okay, so that's the mix bus compression. The other thing that folks were saying is, what do you mean about transient shaping? Okay, so transient shaping is doing the opposite to the mix bus compressor. So I'm going to go in Ableton 10. You just get it out of the box. It's called drum bus. Okay, remember I said about there was a preset called Bonzo on the dials? I'm just going to drop that drum bus preset onto the drum track and listen what happens. Bypass it. Sounds like a different drum kit, doesn't it? Here it is engaged. So what's it doing? So it's doing three main things. Well, it's doing more than three main things. There's compression on it for a start. That's the yellow button here. So if I turn the compression off, it's not really changing the sound that much, making it quieter. But that's because most of the work is being done on the transients at the beginning of each hit. And it's overdriving them. It's applying crunch. So it's, in each case, it's adding distortion of one kind of another to the signal. It's intentionally distorting those transients, the big bursts of loud noise at the beginning of the drum hit. And that's what's making it louder. So if I run it again and I actually, if I zero all these dials, we'll just bring them in one at a time. So there are three levels of action on this. So the soft, medium and hard. I'm going to just do it full on so that you hear what the difference is. Now, damping means effectively it's a high pass filter. Yeah, it's a high pass filter. So if I really dial the damping round, it's not going to let high frequency sound through at all. So let's start with that. So at the moment, the damping is set at 20 kilohertz, which is about the threshold of human hearing at the top end. So if I play the track again, see how I've dialed everything down? It's now closer to the original sound. So if I bypass it now, very little change. Okay, so it's what it's doing to those transients at the beginning of each hit that's making the difference. So let's dial the damping back to nothing and listen to all the high frequencies go. Suddenly it sounds like I'm playing through a bunch of socks. Okay, there may be a reason why you want that to take place, or you might want that to be a component of the signal. So the drum bus, you can have the dry wet balance. At the moment I've got it entirely wet, so it's 100% process signal. If I dial it to 50% and then bypass it, listen to the kick drum disappear. Okay, and then take the bypass off and listen to the kick drum come back. Hear it? So there are even just that one control is useful if you've got a transient shaper. So we're back at the 100% wet signal. So let's turn the damping off. Okay, the central frequency of the low end enhancer, and you can actually tell Ableton to listen to the track, and it will set the frequency to the key that the song's in. Physics or magic, I leave that up to you. So what it means, if I dial the frequency down again, listen to it change. More to the point, listen to it change as I dial it up. Not an awful lot because the cymbals aren't doing a lot. So what do we want the cymbals to do? We want a bit of drive, we want a bit of grit. So let's dial the grit in, let's dial the drive up. Bit of crunch. And suddenly you're hearing the transients ringing a lot more. And how about getting some nice thump from the kick drum? So let's dial the crunch down again. And we'll put the boom in, which is the low end frequencies and the low mids. And they will really change the sound of the kick drum. And you can hear it ring. Now we can hear it ring, we can change the frequency. Hear it? I can tune the bass drum to the song even after it's been recorded, because most drummers will tune their drums before they start playing. I'm doing it after the fact. And if you get it really low, it starts breaking up and it starts sounding a bit flappy, and it's really not very nice at all. French Doggy just says 808. Absolutely. Kind of, I mean, what the 808 would do would be to play with the actual pitch of the sample and re-pitch it while it was playing it back. I'm just doing it post-processing by just picking up the resonant frequencies and just having effectively a filter that is going round and only emphasizing a particular frequency range of one note, which is making it go, which is, yeah, that's not pleasant. So let's turn the boom down. So that's the basics of the setting. There are, remember I was saying don't rely on presets, kids, because presets can lead you astray. So use your ears. Certainly if you're using the boom setting on that, tune it or push the tune button so that Ableton tunes it to the bass frequency of the track so that it doesn't sound horrible and out of tune. But Bonzo on the dials is not subtle. Mr. Bonham was not a subtle person, but the transient shaping enhance preset that I use, which just has, it has a bit of drive, but everything else is down 24%, 19%. And I will usually set that for a dry wet of about 80% wet signal. And that gets me a fairly decent sound. There's your punch. So a bit of compression, a bit of drive. You can, if you haven't got Ableton Live 10 and you don't have the drum bus, there are other transient shapers available. There's some very good ones out there that you can get. But frankly, I just use the stock one out of Ableton. I'm very happy with it. And unless I really want the drums to take a back seat, then I put the transient shaping enhance preset on. I might fiddle with it and tune it and turn it down or turn it way back, but it's usually there in the mix. So yeah, that's kind of me and how I get more punch with my tracks, and how I make sure my tracks are loud enough but not too loud. And as you saw, there are toys that you can download for free. So the Julian loudness meter for checking your loudness. There is the Young W1 maximizer. The links are on my blog, and the blog link will be coming up in the credits at the end of the show. And that's kind of it. And it is, good Lord, it's nearly 11 o'clock here. Hope that was informative, see? And yes, thank you to, I think, was it you, Different Dogie, you pointed that out last week, and it's like, right, I'm stealing that. So yes, loads of information coming up on Thursday night show, when I will be talking a bit more about making music and playing you, hopefully, the rest of the Spontaneous Grand Pianos album that I have to finish by Thursday, because it's FAWM a week tomorrow, when we can all go nuts and start writing 14 songs in the 28 days of the month of February. And we will do so, won't we? You know you want to. It will be huge fun. I am really looking forwards to taking part again this year. Can't wait. Fingers itching. Guitar picks aplenty. I mean, that's how many guitar picks I have these days. And I have 2 more boxes of the old Fender tortoiseshell, these little chappies, because you can't get them in Europe anymore. So that is was my my guitar pick of choice. These days, I have to say, I've become a convert to the Jim Dunlop Tortex 3 jazz pickups, which are rather nice, and never one to do things by halves. This time last year, I bought a box of 144 of them, and they're all in that tin. So I am not likely to run out of guitar picks anytime soon. And because it is nearly February album writing month, I have to show you possibly the best guitar pick of them all, which is in here somewhere. There it is. So if you're a guitarist and you're taking part in February album writing month, get you a FAWM.org guitar pick. There are loads and loads of lovely bits of merchandise on the FAWM website. We'll be relaunching the merch website in the next week or so. No new merch, sadly, but there are still plenty of rather cool accessories. It's very, very nice FAWM hoodie. There's a Rock Hands t-shirt. There's a FAWM egg shaker. There are FAWM stickers. There's a FAWM beverage container. And no self-respecting musician should be without a beverage container to hand somewhere in their studio. But more on that on Thursday. And this time next Sunday will be the final Is It FAWM Yet show, I guess, because the following week, when the theme tune says, Is It FAWM Yet?, we can all just say, yes, it is. So there you go. Be prepared. Get those DAWs up and running. Get all your plugins installed. Make sure that all your system updates are up to date. Make sure that your audio interface is working. And huge commiserations to Mr. Sapient, whose interface has failed with 8 days to go until February album writing month starts again. That's really, really sucky timing to have a major equipment failure. So he was emailing me earlier saying, what are you using and is it any good? So yes, the answer is I use a Complete Audio 6 audio interface. So it's 6 ins, 6 outs. It's the Mark II. It's made by Native Instruments. It's fairly reasonably priced. The latency on it is pretty good. Still not entirely convinced it sounds as good as the Focusrite Scarlett that I used to have, but with a bit of tweaking, I get there. So that's what I use. But I'm going to let you go because I have now been waffling on for 2 hours, and thank you for hanging out with me once again. Thank you once again for pushing me up to affiliate status on Twitch, which I am chuffed to bits with. It really has put me in a very silly mood, as you could hear on the piece of music that I played you just now. And I'm sure the silliness will only increase as the challenge of trying to write 14 songs in 28 days kicks in a week tomorrow. And Wobby123 sums it up perfectly. She says, hooray! So until then, whatever you're doing, look after yourselves, stay safe, stay well, stay sane, stay Wayne. If it's snowing where you are, take care if you have to leave the house because it's going to be really slippy and nasty out there. And if you're snowy and it's the UK where you are, then stay off the roads because nobody in this country knows how to drive in snow. And wear a damn mask if you're going out. Please practice and respect social distancing and just generally take care and look after yourselves because you're lovely people. And I want to see you all here again next week at the same time on the same channel, head first only at twitch.tv. And until then, he said as he reached unobtrusively for the mouse to put the final credits in, I'll just say, have a good one, folks.